Bakit ganito ang sistema ng pagpapabaksin? First come, first serve. Baka doon ako malagyan ng COVID, wala na social distancing.
Wala na po number. Susunod, kung kayo ang barangay ho dito, bilangin nyo na yung tao, sasabihin,
Ay, hindi po namin nanggagaling po yung ticket po.
Nakakalungkot sir kasi nakakita namin sa harap namin na inabot yung huling slot. So kami, pumila kami mga alas 4 dito.
Manila's inoculation drive is generating a lot of questions and criticism once again. Long lines have formed in their vaccination sites due to their first-come, first-served policy.
Some even line up as early as the night before in the hopes of getting a vaccine slot. The health department says master listing is still the way to go to avoid such super spreader events. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Robbie Alampay, you're watching The Big Story. Let's start with Manila City's vaccination efforts in Binondo, seeing box office-like queues with residents hoping to finally get their vaccine shots.
No sanction yet, though, for the Manila City LGU, but some policy changes may be due for its distinct immunization strategy. Greg Gregorio has the big story.
If not for the face masks and physically distanced queue, one could mistake this scene as a regular pre-pandemic day in Binondo, Manila. But residents aren't here to shop. They're hoping to get a COVID-19 vaccine slot. With Manila City's first-come, first-served policy, residents had no choice but to try their luck in securing one of the allocated 2,000 doses on Monday. Corazon, a senior citizen, opted to just go home after seeing the line.
Kasi nakakatakot eh. Baka doon ako malagyan ng COVID, wala na social distancing.
Others were more insistent, staying past the declared cutoff at around 8 a.m.
99! Wala na po number.
Nakakalungkot sir kasi nakakita namin sa harap namin na inabot yung huling slot. So kami, pumila kami mga alas 4 dito.
5 o'clock nandito na kami. Inform naman sa amin, baka sakali magpasobra daw si Mayor.
Others were dismayed, especially those who lined up as early as last night.
Kaya susunod, kung kayo ang barangay ho dito, bilangin nyo na yung tao, sasabihin,
Ay, hindi po namin nanggagaling po yung ticket po.
Nagdala na ako ng upuan kasi sabi dun sa mga comment, magdala na daw ng upuan yung mga ngalay ka sa pila.
Manila Mayor Isko Moreno appeals for more patience from his constituents, saying vaccination depends on available supply. He also defended the city's vaccination policy, noting how some who pre-registered failed to show up in their confirmed schedule. The health department says LGUs should be more organized in their vaccine rollout to avoid having a super spreader event.
Kailangan paganahin natin yung master listing process natin, yung scheduling, para po hindi tayo nagkukumpul-kumpul dito sa mga bakunahan.
The MMDA says the Manila LGU won't face any sanctions over how it conducts its vaccination. But a meeting between Manila City officials and the DOH has been set to go over possible policy adjustments. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
To give us her take on the matter, we have with us Dr. Nina Gloriani, head of DOST's Vaccine Expert Panel. Dr. Gloriani, welcome po to The Big Story.
Yes, good evening, Robbie.
Good evening po, ma'am. Well, the good news here is ang daming gustong magpabakuna. Dati, problema natin, vaccine hesitancy, but you look at the lines in Manila, the good news there is mukhang maraming gustong magpabakuna. But is this the way to go about it?
No, sad to say, I will have to say no to this, what's happening now in Manila. There must be a better way of, managing the crowd. The master listing, as Yusek Rosette Verheire said, should be followed. The master listing with some substitution, You cannot just have all these people lining up like that. There are two things you have to consider in this pandemic. Well, of course, we want the vaccination to improve, the coverage to improve as early as possible to get to that population protection that we need. But also, we need to stop transmission. And this crowding here will never stop transmission. Sorry, sad to say. Manila could do better than this.
Yes, but ma'am, maybe you could clarify something for us. Is this policy or not? I mean, are LGUs just being encouraged to create these master lists, particularly online registration, or is that in fact policy?
I would suppose that is policy. We've known that for many, we have been meeting many times and there should be this master list. And in fact, no, what I see is all the younger people, maybe these are the economic frontliners as well as the elderly, the senior citizens together. So I thought it was clear that there should be a separate line for the elderly, the A1, A2, A3, and then the economic frontliners will be in another line. So I don't know. I'm so disappointed seeing this again. It's like what happened with the Pfizer vaccination. And
Okay.
for 2,000, you have how many here? 4,000?
Okay, that was Dr. Nina Gloriani of the DOST's Vaccine Expert Panel. Maraming salamat po. The Philippines is lagging behind its Southeast Asian neighbors in its COVID vaccine rollout, at least according to think tank Our World in Data. Tonight's big number, 4.23%, or the percentage of our population that has been given a first dose of COVID-19 vaccine. That puts the Philippines in 8th spot among 10 ASEAN economies. When it comes to full vaccination, the country has only covered 1.5% of the population. But when it comes to absolute numbers or total shots administered, the Philippines actually ranks second with 6.31 million doses. The palace denies deceiving the public when it comes to reporting testing figures.
These are the other big stories tonight. Metro Manila mayors have reached a consensus to cut curfew hours, and this comes ahead of the president's announcement tonight of a new classification for the NCR Plus bubble. Is the dreaded EDSA congestion back? Last week, hundreds of passengers lined up at EDSA carousel stations. Car volume on the thoroughfare is also nearing its pre-pandemic average. And teams have started to arrive for the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers. Question is, will Kai Soto suit up for Gilas Pilipinas? These big stories after the break.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. Despite claims by the President and other government officials that traffic has eased in EDSA, scenes of long lines from last week seemingly shows that even despite the pandemic, woes in EDSA is far from over. Gerard de la Peña has the story.
Ang traffic ngayon sa EDSA maluwang na.
Just last week, the President exclaimed heavy traffic in EDSA had eased. But photos of scenarios in EDSA last Friday showed otherwise, with hundreds of passengers stuck and lining up at the Ortigas station of EDSA busway in Mandaluyong. Social distancing was hardly observed. Apart from the heavy rains, the LTFRB attributed this to the traffic jam in Makati, which prevented buses from entering the exclusive lane. They now want the dispatch of buses to be expedited to fill the demand.
Nag-average sila ng mga 320 to 350 daily. According to the consortium consortia, minsan may mga drivers na kukulang din sila ng drivers. We have to address it at para ma-increase natin yun.
On Monday morning, commuters like Clarissa and Ellie had to line up for more than 30 minutes at the EDSA busway just to catch a free trip. Ride here is free for health workers and authorized persons outside of residence.
Sobrang init, sobrang haba.
Pero yung haba ng aking oras na pagpunta, syempre, hassle.
Motorists are also starting to have a difficult time on EDSA. Based on MMDA data, vehicular volume on the major thoroughfare now average 380,000 cars per day. This is already way above the 260,000 daily volume that EDSA was designed for. It's also not too far from the pre-pandemic average of 405,000 cars. Despite this, the MMDA is not yet considering bringing back the number coding scheme.
Pero sa ngayon, sa nakikita namin mga numero, although ang ating volume ay halos pareho na nung pre-pandemic, ay hindi naman kinakailangan dahil maganda naman ang dalo ng trapiko.
The MMDA also believes that the opening of several bridges and skyways will help ease traffic in the metro. For News 5, Gerard De La Peña, We Are One News.
Curfew in Metro Manila will be shorter starting tomorrow, running from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. This is 2 hours shorter from the previous curfew of 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. MMDA Chairman Benher Abalos says this is to accommodate late-night commuters and vaccination programs of some LGUs. President Duterte is expected to announce new quarantine classifications this evening, but the palace thinks it's unlikely that NCR will be downgraded to modified GCQ.
Sumipa ang mga bagong variants na napakababa ng mga kaso sa Metro Manila, hindi pa rin nag-MGCQ ang Metro Manila. Is it likely to be MGCQ? I have very serious doubts na magiging MGCQ po yan.
Time for an extra look at some of the day's big stories. The president puts his foot down and tells Cebu to follow the IATF's quarantine protocols for inbound passengers and OFWs. The palace said the president heeded the advice of the health department. Malacanang now leaves it up to the Interior Department on whether to impose sanctions on the Cebu government for defying IATF guidelines. The recently shipped 1 million Sinovac doses remain in storage 3 days after arrival. According to the health department, they have yet to receive a certificate of analysis from the vaccine manufacturer. This is needed before the jabs can be distributed. The Pfizer shots from COVAX, meanwhile, have already been delivered to LGUs. The Education Department reports that over 150 errors have been spotted in learning materials since distance learning started last year. These include a vulgar description of the Filipino folk creature aswang. Undersecretary Diosdado San Antonio said majority of these errors are from locally developed materials, while over 20 are from unknown sources. A new baseline law which reinforces the Philippines' arbitral win on the West Philippine Sea is now on the president's table. But will China even recognize this? Mobile journalist Stanley Gahete gives us a front seat to the story.
A retired Supreme Court Justice has written to the President asking him to certify as urgent a new baseline law. This law will define in detail the territory and jurisdiction of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea. Retired Justice Francis Hardilesa says the old law passed during the time of President Arroyo is vague and lumps all of the Pag-asa Island group. Hardilesa says the new law should name and identify the 128 rocks, shoals, submerged in water or not that belongs to the Philippines.
This is especially necessary in features such as Baho de Masinloc and Pag-asa, where Chinese and Vietnamese vessels are always present. The bill thus draws baselines around the contested rocks precisely to enable the Philippines to exercise its rights in its uncontested EEZ.
International law requires each country to be more specific about its territory. China has its 9-dash line, which the tribunal at The Hague has already invalidated. The question is, will China or Vietnam, which are claiming these same rocks, recognize our law?
Of course, China will oppose this, and of course, China might even adopt its own baselines. The same with Malaysia and Vietnam. The thing is, if Malaysia adopts baselines around beach rocks, then it would be an implicit acceptance and enforcement of the award.
Cardilesa, in his letter to the president, says a new law that detailed the Philippine jurisdiction is the best and cheapest way to enforce Philippine victory in the Hague Tribunal. He says it will also help the country more united and less emotional about the issue in the West Philippine Sea.
But if we are not really sure about the status of the features there, then we might unnecessarily actually stoke emotions that are not helpful in diplomatic relations.
I am Stanley Gahete. We are One News.
President Duterte is putting off the termination of the Visiting Forces Agreement for another 6 months. Foreign Affairs Secretary Teddy Locsin made the announcement just moments ago after a meeting with the President and Philippine Ambassador to the U.S. Babes Romualdez. Locsin says this is while the President studies the move and both sides address concerns on particular aspects of the military deal. The President threatened to terminate the VFA early last year on claims of supposed U.S. meddling in internal affairs of the Philippines. He then withdrew the planned termination mid-last year due to certain developments in the region.
Now for the big story in sports. Another Filipino athlete has made history. Alex Ayala has captured the 2021 French Open girls doubles title with Russia's Oksana Selekmeteva. The Filipina-Russian duo completed the magical clay run without dropping a single set on the day the Philippines celebrated its 123rd Independence Day. The 16-year-old Ayala became the first Filipino tennis player to win 2 Grand Slam titles. She earlier won the 2020 Australian Open girls doubles title with Indonesia's Priske Nugroho. Also on Independence Day, another Filipino has gained a ticket to the Tokyo Olympics. Weightlifter Elreen Ando becomes the 11th Filipino to qualify for the Summer Games after nabbing a spot through the continental quota for the women's minus 64 kilogram division. Ando was the highest-ranked Asian in the division, earning her an invite to Tokyo. And with the qualification, Ando will join fellow weightlifter and Olympic silver medalist Hayden Diaz in competing for gold. Time for another quick break. When we return, Isang Bayan has finally unveiled its nominees for the top post in 2022. But with many of the bets begging off, what exactly has gone wrong? And this is what fans have been waiting for, the third and final window of the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers as teams start to arrive in the country. Gilas will try to draw first blood against South Korea on Wednesday.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. Political scientists are dismayed over Isang Bayan's list of potential candidates for the presidential and vice presidential post. Beyond that, they say the opposition's supposedly holier-than-thou attitude might just be its downfall. Leanne Los Baños with the details.
This government is really incompetent.
Opposition movement Isang Bayan has unveiled its nominees for the presidential and vice presidential posts in next year's elections. But it's not exactly a strong start, at least according to 2 political experts. In an interview with One News's Agenda, UP Political Science Professor Clarita Carlos expressed disappointment with the list.
I would consider the names that they have put forward as stale, like panis. And I'm sorry to use that cruel word. I'm thinking, grappling with the word to use, but it's like pagkatingin ko ng pangalan, parang gusto kong humikab. Oh my my God, yan lang ba? Tinintay-hintay na.
For his part, Attorney Michael Yusinko of the Ateneo Policy Center pointed to Isambayan's lack of alliances with other parties, hence the outright rejection of others who were originally listed.
They will only deal with political parties, organized political parties, or organized and formal political coalitions. Because these are the groups, these are the entities that can launch and pull off a viable political campaign.
Both Carlos and Yusinko believe that the way to go is for Isambayan to do away with its quote elitist image.
Whenever people style themselves as holier than the rest of us, then samasalasa in the first instance. I'll tell them, get off your high horse, please, and talk to the people.
In a radio interview over the weekend, Vice President Leni Robredo said the opposition should first understand why the masses are still drawn to President Duterte and other politicians like him. She also told the opposition to refrain from thinking that they are the only smart and competent ones in the country. The opposition coalition has since defended its shortlist, saying they're not expecting firm decisions yet from any of the nominees. Reporting for News 5, Mean Los Baños, we are One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. From Philippine Star, Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte clarifies that the spike in COVID-19 cases in the city is a result of increased testing. Mayor Sara was responding to comments from Vice President Leni Robredo urging Davao City to take a look at Cebu City's handling of the COVID-19 surge last year. The National Grid Corporation of the Philippines is washing off blame over the current power supply mess in the country. NGCP spokesperson Cynthia Alabanza told Business World Live that they are only responsible for transmission. Instead, NGCP urges the Energy Department to assist power generating companies and improve policy. NGCP warns of a possible thinning supply by the end of the month. Authorities have yet to identify the charred body found floating near the wreckage of MV Titan 8, which caught fire on Saturday. News 5 reports that the 7 crew members of the cargo vessel sustained injuries from the fire, while 1 member is still missing. The Bureau of Fire Protection also has yet to determine the cause of the fire. Another big story in sports. With the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers just a few days away, several nations, including Gilas Pilipinas, have arrived in Clark. A total of 7 teams will be seeing action in the tournament, namely the Philippines, South Korea, Chinese Taipei, Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, and China. And as of tonight, only Thailand has yet to arrive in Clark. All teams are required to undergo RT-PCR testing upon arrival at the Quest Hotel and another midway into the tournament. The games will begin Wednesday as Gilas faces South Korea. Naturalized center Ange Kwame has been given the go signal to play. And as for Kai Soto, his availability is still up in the air.
We want to make sure that we are not compromising his health. He has not done a lot of basketball in the last few days, and we want to immerse him slowly.
You can catch all the games of the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers live on TV5 and on One Sports Plus.
In world news, G7 leaders agreed to coordinate their response to challenges posed by China much more closely. In their summit in Britain, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the G7 must stand strong and united as partners in addressing key issues with Beijing. One concrete example of G7 action was its offer to help developing nations with infrastructure that could rival Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. But Trudeau said the G7 may still need to work with China on some issues, one of which is climate change. On the sidelines of that summit, Queen Elizabeth just showed how royals slice cake, not with a knife, but with a sword. During an afternoon reception with volunteers for her 70th year on the throne, Queen Elizabeth had to cut a massive celebratory cake for the big lunch, but a knife is too mainstream for Her Majesty.
This is something that is more
Kapag sa Pilipinas siguro, itak yan.
70 years, ha?
Grabe, no? Long
Longest
life.
reigning monarch, I believe.
And speaking of Gilas Pilipinas, we're very excited to see them in action this coming June 16. And I actually spoke to Coach Tab Baldwin earlier, and we talked about his vision for this team because we have a relatively younger squad facing Korea, a veteran team. And we're excited to see how the team blends in with Ange Kwame Kai Soto. Watch out for that tomorrow.
At supportahan po natin, puso.
Puso, Pilipinas. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Hall. We are One News. Have a good evening.